This is a relay project.
Real Talk starts right now. Here's Ryan Jespersen.
Real Talkers, this episode goes right to the heart of one of the most explosive stories in our home province of Alberta. Athana Mentzelopoulos is the former president and CEO of Alberta Health Services, or AHS. She was fired by the Alberta government exactly a year ago today. The province says that she was dismissed for, quote, alarming incompetence and an inability to carry out the mandates that she was given, including major health systems reforms. She says that that's not true. In a wrongful dismissal lawsuit, Mentzelopoulos alleges that she was fired because she refused to shut down an internal investigation into procurement practices at AHS, including concerns about contracts, private providers, and how public dollars were being spent. She also claims that since her termination, she's faced an ongoing campaign of intimidation and harassment tied to speaking up. Until now, Athana Mentzelopoulos has not granted any interviews. Today, she speaks publicly, and she's doing it here on Real Talk in our feature interview presented by Mercedes-Benz Edmonton West. That in 30 seconds. This episode is happening with the presenting sponsorship from our friends at Hansen Distillery. Real Talk and Real Spirits. Hansen Distillery is Edmonton's original distillery, rooted in prairie grit and a rebellious spirit. Hansen's known for authentic small batch whiskey, vodka, gin, moonshine, and unique liqueurs crafted. Every bottle tells a true story of passion, heritage, and hands-on craftsmanship. So raise a glass to Real Talk and Real Spirits. You can visit Hansen Distillery on 174th Street, 111th Avenue, just north of Mercedes-Benz Edmonton West, or look for their latest creations in Alberta liquor stores. You can learn more about the Hansen story on their website, hansendistillery.com. Proudly local, always original. Hansen is made right here. As we welcome Athana Mentzelopoulos to the Real Talk studio in the historic Mercer Warehouse in downtown Edmonton, thank you for being here. This is a little out of your wheelhouse, isn't it, it seems?
It's way out of my wheelhouse.
Yeah, what do you mean by that?
Well, I've done media over the years. I've testified at committees. I haven't done a format like this before, so I'm feeling a little anxious, Ryan. Thank you for helping to put me at ease.
A year ago today, you were let go by the Alberta government. That was about a year after you were hired by Danielle Smith to come in, and I don't know if you would put it this way, I'll let you use your words, to overhaul the healthcare system, but to take over a system that the Premier had promised that she would reform, that she would fix within 90 days. A lot happened within that year, and a lot has happened in the year since you were dismissed. How are you wrapping your mind around it?
Well, I'm probably aging rapidly as I wrap my mind around it. There is, I find myself with time on my hands, which is probably the hardest thing because I worked from the time I was very young. My dad ran a restaurant, so I was part of the labor force there. I just... probably that's been one of the hardest things, but there's obviously been a great deal that's been going on.
Today, we'll dig into the internal investigation that you say that you were asked to wrap up or to halt. We'll talk about the government allegations around your, quote, alarming incompetence, but I think it makes sense to lead with the story that's been published at theglobeandmail.com just hours ago, where you say that you've faced a campaign of intimidation since launching your wrongful dismissal lawsuit against the Alberta government. In plain language, what's going on?
Well, it started during the summer, probably before that, but I started to become aware of it in the summer, and then I realized it had been going on for a few months. But I guess where it really, the first indication I had that this was going to be a difficult process, setting aside some of the comments that elected officials made about me in the legislature, which never get easier to hear and have continued, but it was last March in Maine estimates when the Premier appeared and she had some questions about me. And she answered the questions in part by saying that I had mishandled an RCMP investigation when I was a deputy minister in British Columbia, and that people had been terminated as a consequence of that. And one of them took his life. I was quite alarmed by that. It is a distortion. And like many things, I think that I've heard about this, there's this nugget of truth, and then it's wrapped in an immense amount of distortion. There was an investigation in British Columbia. There were people terminated. It was badly handled. But almost everything she describes, in fact, everything she described really could be attributed to someone other than me. And there's a very lengthy report into that. And it was within a couple of months of that this sort of proxy campaign started up, and that has become kind of the meat in their sandwich for months and months.
Hansard shows the premier referring to this suicide death, this tragic suicide death in British Columbia. It's on the record politically in Alberta, and it's also on the record in Canadian political podcast circles. And a podcaster by the name of David Wallace, and I know that this audience may recognize that name. He and his podcasting partner, James DeFiore, have just recently had their devices seized by police as part of an ongoing investigation. It's been in news across the country. They've also touched on this. We managed to track down a clip, and I want to play this, and then I'll get you to respond. Here's David Wallace on his podcast, The Political Dark Arts Report, talking about
Athana Bloody Hands Mentzelopoulos. And the reason I say bloody hands is because if you did the research on this woman that I've done, or James DeFiore have done, and a team of about, gazillion private investigators, you will find that this woman pretty much fucking murdered a man, okay? Drove him to suicide, framed a bunch of other people, fabricated a statement about the RCMP having an active investigation against people who turned out to be completely innocent of the bullshit she alleged. Sounds a bit familiar.
The second that audio started playing, your entire body language changed. How come?
It's really hard to hear. It's very hard to hear that. And it's not true. And it went on for months. And it extended into other areas of intimidation.
Like what?
Well, if I set aside some of the things that he has said, indicating or suggesting that he has documents, for a long time he said that he had a copy of the investigation report from AHS. That was confusing to me. He said a lot of other things about me, about people that I knew or that I worked with. In some cases, I'd never even heard of those people. But then as it got into the fall, it got... Well, actually, it was. I didn't really take it seriously, as difficult as it was to hear. I'm not a social media expert, so when I look at something like that, it's alarming. But I have friends who understand these things, and they explain to me it doesn't have reach. And the rational part of my brain, which I think is the majority of my brain, I'd like to say, sort of thought, well, people know what's true and what's not true. And how long can this last? But then, of course, they talked a lot about the surveillance of Carrie Tate. That happened. Carrie Tate is a reporter at the Globe and Mail. That was very alarming. I'm not suggesting that they did the surveillance, but they talked about it, and that got my attention. Of course, I think it got a lot of people's attention. But then in August, the individuals there, through this proxy campaign, they actually did a couple of shows where they talked about my court case and suggested that I was avoiding being questioned. And then they said that I had been invited to be interviewed by Judge Wyant. If you recall, Judge Wyant is a retired justice from Manitoba who was appointed by the government here to do an independent or so-called independent investigation. And in August, I was alerted to these podcasters saying on their, I don't even like to call them podcasters. Let's pretend I put it in air quotes whenever I say that. But they suggested that Judge Wyant had been trying to reach me and that I was avoiding being questioned. And they went so far as to say that I was hiding and that pretty soon my face was going to be on the back of milk cartons. I wasn't aware that Judge Wyant was looking for me. I had actually reached out to the government the previous May because, if you recall, when Judge Wyant was appointed, his initial deadline for an interim report was May, and then a final report after that. And I never assumed that he would want to talk to me. I wanted to talk to him, but he's independent. He's obviously somebody with a great deal of experience. He was going to make up his own mind about who he talked to. But I also wanted to make sure that if he did want to talk to me, he'd know how to find me. And I had gotten in touch with government. I knew the deputy minister who was sort of overseeing his work. I had worked with him as a deputy. I called his office and said I wanted to make sure that they had my email address, they knew how to reach me. And I think a few days after that, they announced an extension to his deadline. So I thought, okay, well, we'll see what happens. And when I heard these individuals on this proxy campaign saying that I was avoiding questioning, and then I subsequently found out that, in fact, the judge had reached out through an employee of government. The invitation had gone to somebody who was out of the country, and I was not aware of it. It was very alarming that these two individuals could somehow know about that.
Well, what's making this even more interesting, and people are starting to connect the dots, is that the two podcasters involved in this, David Wallace and James DeFiore, per reporting by the Globe and Mail, have been ordered, per court order, to hand over their electronic devices. And what they have divulged to law enforcement, and what has been revealed, is that these podcasters, or at least one of them, they're accused of hiring a former AHS board member who you are accusing of harassing you. And this audience just heard some of the content that they've put out, claim that they were hired by an Edmonton lawyer by the name of Brian Ward. And Brian Ward, on multiple occasions, has represented Sam Raish. And Sam Raish is the founder and CEO of MH Care, which is the company that is at the center of the healthcare procurement controversy. Is anything that I've said there inaccurate as far as you can tell, or based on what you know?
Well, I want to be really careful about what I say. I don't think you've said anything inaccurate. I think it reflects the reporting. I do want to say that in terms of that former board member and the action that he brought, that's something I learned about on the day that it was reported in the Edmonton Journal. I was not aware. It was an ex parte action. I was not aware of it until it became public. But I think based on what I know, there's nothing I would disagree in terms of what you said.
Let's go back to when you were first hired as CEO of AHS, a career bureaucrat.
Yes.
Is that fair to say? Someone familiar with the workings of senior levels of management in government in different provinces, including British Columbia and Alberta. What did you perceive your mandate to be, or what were you told your mandate was? And what were a couple of the initial observations that you made as soon as you assumed that role?
Well, I have to be really careful here, Ryan, and I want to say I'm not here today to try to litigate my case in public, and I have to be very respectful of the court process.
We'll acknowledge that the court process is still underway. You're suing the Alberta government for
Yes.
$1.7 million.
Yes.
Why are you doing this interview right now, by the way?
Well, it is to talk about what's happened since my case. I mean, that's what I would like to talk about. There's so much that has happened in the past year that is not the subject of litigation, which I can talk about. There's been a lot of commentary from government about this, almost unending. There are some things that I can speak about generally, but I do have to be very careful about what I say. There's probably going to be a very large number of lawyers who work for government who are going to look at every word I say, and I'm not really interested in giving them any reason to have any more work.
Understandable, and you don't want to lose your case for yourself. You don't want to shoot yourself in the foot. What was your mandate as you understood it when you were hired?
Well, I can point to the public comments. Anybody can look at this. You don't have to have been the AHS CEO to see that I started in December of 2023. And at that point, the government had already been very vocal about their plans to, as they call it, refocus the healthcare system. They had made the announcement about that the prior November in 2023. So that was clear. And I think that, that I somehow would have some engagement, involvement with that was clear. And I think, again, anybody can look at the public record, the government's plans, but also the government's, I guess, perceptions, in particular Danielle Smith's approach to public health. That was all very clearly on the public record, and her general, I guess, opinion of AHS has never been a secret.
When did this? When did you first start to sniff out what could prove to be an issue with procurement? How was this first put in front of you? When did this first surface?
Again, I'm going to be really careful. I mean, there's a lot of filed court documents that anybody can access. There's been a lot of reporting on this as well. So I think without going into anything that would be privileged in any way, I think the public record is pretty clear that it was in the late summer of 2024 when it started to be evident that there may be some issues that needed to be analyzed.
Okay, we spoke to one of Alberta's health ministers, Adriana LaGrange, on December 3rd, and we talked to her about this. And I want to get your response to what she had to say. I'm going to let the audience know that this is about a 2-minute clip that you're going to hear. We're going to play it in extended length. I want to make sure that we're fair in the context. There's been no edit here in the answer that the health minister gave us. Here's the Honorable Adriana LaGrange on the record on Real Talk.
I had concerns with AHS procurement right from the beginning. Some of the things just didn't make sense. People applied for RFPs and it was years before they actually were acted upon. Oftentimes, the climate that people were in terms of financial, inflation went up, and yet they were tied to numbers that they had put forward years before in their RFP. So this new procurement, it actually aligns with all of the recommendations that were brought forward by Judge Wyatt. And we're looking at the Auditor General report as well. We want to make sure that we have a strong procurement process that is above reproach.
Yeah, when you had sniffed that out, had you raised those concerns with the Premier? Like, did you raise those concerns in Cabinet? Because I think people are given the impression that former Minister Guthrie was the only one that raised concerns and he kind of paid for it with his job. Is that inaccurate?
Well, I always raise concerns. And in fact, it's the reason why when the former CEO that has put forward the lawsuit, that when she was in her position, when she said, I think there's a problem here, I said, go dig deeper, but keep me informed as to what's going on. And so that has always been my approach. If there's something wrong, let's figure it out and let's fix it.
But that doesn't track with the public's understanding. We're talking about Athana Mentzelopoulos, the former Alberta Health Services CEO. I think the public's impression and reporting around it is that when she raised concerns about procurement and said that she was digging into it, that she was fired. That seems to be the public's impression of the entire premise of her lawsuit, of her wrongful termination suit.
I would tell them to go and look at all of the documentation, my statement that was provided, because it actually shares my version. And while I can't speak to things that are before the courts, I can just say that I have always been very concerned on procurement and contracts that do not follow the policies that were in place. And Alberta Health Services did not follow their own policies in a number of things that I saw as the Minister of Health that were brought before me.
How does that align with what you remember about that period of time? Did the health minister tell you to go digging?
I think the way that I can address this without straying into areas that might get me in trouble with various counsel is to say that I stand by my statement of claim, first of all. I always have. And I think that when the minister references her statement, the government's statement of defense, you can look at what's happened over the last year and you can go through the various elements of it. And I think one of the big developments there was actually the Wyatt report. And so if you listen there, and I think I'm recalling it correctly, thanks for replaying it, where Adriana Lagrange talks about, it's very focused on AHS policies, AHS. And that's the way they've characterized the Wyant report as well, that Wyant found no wrongdoing of elected officials and that it was anything that had gone wrong was all at AHS. That's the way they've characterized the Wyant report. I think that Adriana,
In other words, not within the health ministry.
Yeah, or the public service at all. It was all AHS. And when you read the Wyant report, that's not what he says at all. And I like the Wyant report because I can talk about it. And I actually think that even with the limited mandate that he had, it is it's a very detailed report. I did meet with him. I met with Judge Wyant in September. I was actually a little bit hesitant, if I'm being honest, because at that point his interim report was due only in a few weeks when I met with him. And I said to him, your report is due, like your interim report is due. Have you written it? And he said no. He said he had not written it. So that was in, I don't know, the first week of September. And
Did he tell you why?
Yes, he did. He said that he had received 2.25 million documents, something like that, that they were not very well organized, that it had taken an immense amount of time to get those organized, to look at them. And he also told me that he was having some discussions about potentially getting another extension, although he didn't want a long one. Now, in the end, he was late in terms of the deadline for the interim report, but I think he made the deadline for his final report. So I don't know if he didn't get an extension or if he didn't ultimately need it. But at that point in early September, he told me that he hadn't written the report. And I felt pretty confident saying to him, okay, well, ask me anything. And he said, I want you to tell me what happened. And so I did. And when I read his report, I feel really confident that he had a lot of confidence in what I said. And when you read his report, what he says is, and the government again and again and again has said that, I think Mickey Amory, even in December, that Wyant's report confirmed that there was no wrongdoing by anybody in government, something like that. Well, if you read his report, what he says is that he did not have the power to subpoena. He couldn't question people under oath. Some people refused to answer questions, which was their right. He said that it seemed at times, and he's a person with a lot of experience, that maybe people weren't being honest with him. And he also said, and I'm going to quote this because I wrote it down. I look at it a lot. I look at it every time I hear the government say that he found no wrongdoing of any elected officials or anybody in government. He said, when I find that there was no wrongful interference by any government official in the matters concerning this report, that only means that I found no evidence of such, but I am not in a position to make a final and absolute determination. I can only make conclusions based on the documents I was able to review and the people I interviewed. And the commentary about his report has strayed, I would suggest, very far from that central finding of his. He also commented in his report that even in September, he was still receiving more documents from government, which is odd, I would say. And he found in a couple of cases that, in fact, both AHS and Alberta Health, which is, government, did not follow their policies. And in the case of the procurement for children's medication, he refers to decision makers not having followed policies. He's not specific there about whether it's AHS or Alberta Health. And when you read his report and you can see how many people were involved and that there were ministers' directives and whatnot, I would suggest that the definition of decision maker in that context deserves a lot of thought.
You know, the news moves fast and there's a lot going on, and the average person in Alberta is probably aware that there have been allegations around some sort of scandal or controversy around procurement. They've heard stories of hockey tickets. They've heard stories of the Turkish Tylenol and private surgical facilities. They may or may not know that you were fired, and fewer of those folks would know that you've subsequently taken the government to court over it, alleging that you were ordered to shut down an investigation. But at face level, on the surface, the allegations are pretty significant, and people are paying attention to the story across the country. Who was it, and when was it that you were pressured to halt or limit that investigation? And in what form did it come? Was it like a suggestion? Was it a warning? Was it a direct instruction? What can you tell us?
Well, I would tell you that since I've been terminated, Danielle Smith, for example, has said that the minister Minister LaGrange, had to order me to hand over the materials from the investigations. There was a day in question period, I think it was April 30th, where Minister Mickey Amery answered questions about this. And in one answer, he said that nobody was fired for doing an investigation. And a couple of minutes later, he said that I was fired because I concealed the results of an investigation. And they have made a lot of speculation, a lot of comments, I would suggest not true, that this investigation was concealed because it didn't align with what I wanted it to say. So I think, to a certain extent, the government has acknowledged that there were investigations going on. They've said that publicly since my termination. What they say is very inconsistent about it. Danielle Smith has said that there were 3 reports, but none of them were complete. At other times, I'm accused of not having provided the results, which would suggest that the investigations were complete. Again, I'm pointing to their record of public comments there, which, as I say, is very interesting reading. I pay very close attention to what they say. And in terms of my case, my statement of claim and what's been reported on it, I would say that the reporting on my statement of claim has been pretty fair, and has indicated that I was advised to wind up my investigation last December of 2024.
As I mentioned in introducing you to the show, if you're just joining us on our live stream presented by California Closets, we're talking to former Alberta Health Services CEO Athana Mentzelopoulos in our feature interview presented by Mercedes-Benz Edmonton West. About a month after you were let go, back in February of 2025, the Premier made it sound like you were pretty difficult to work with. She made it sound like you were not meeting the standard that she had in mind when you were hired under her leadership. I'll get to this and then I'll get you to comment on it. This is Premier Danielle Smith back on February 19th of last year.
We will not allow anyone in Alberta Health Services Management or the NDP to frustrate the progress of improving our health system. Let me be clear. From the onset of our health plan to refocus healthcare, AHS leadership has always shown us resistance, and it is clear that they would rather keep all surgeries in hospitals only operated by Alberta Health Services, which would have resulted in 62,000 fewer surgeries for Albertans last year. That means 62,000 family members, moms and dads and neighbors would not have received their hip or their knee or other surgeries that they needed. We will not be intimidated by the resistance of Alberta Health Services Management and others who want to protect the status quo.
So that's the Premier on the record about a month after you were fired. Your critics will say that this is a classic case of an executive or of a former CEO reframing termination as whistleblowing. What would you say to them?
I've watched that clip, actually, I always think of Star Trek. Resistance is futile. I probably watched a little bit too much Star Trek in graduate school. So first of all, I think the public record is clear that I was actually terminated without cause. When the government filed their statement of defense, they said that they said a lot of things. I won't get into that. You referenced some of what they've said at the top. I have always been told not to repeat the bad stuff, right? So I'm not going to repeat it. But they've said a lot of really bad stuff about me. And that is despite the fact, as I said, that I was terminated without cause. This is, I'm told, something that's called after acquired cause. So that's, but I'm not a lawyer and I'm not going to pretend to be one. The comments there, actually, it's kind of a theme if I reflect on it for a moment. And there've been, and again, I think I can address a lot of your questions by I pointed to the public record and in particular comments that have been made in the last year where I feel like I'm on pretty solid ground because it's in the public sphere. It's not, it's not part of the court proceedings. But there's this kind of evolving response since February, and that was one of the themes. To a certain extent, it still exists, and it is this idea that I, in particular, but AHS generally, are undermining government policy, and that I'll speak for myself, trying to prevent the expansion of surgeries. And I just, I can't reconcile the comment that you just played with other public comments that have been made and with information that's on the public record. Danielle Smith has said again and again publicly since February that government gave AHS $3.5 billion more since 2019, and they haven't done any more surgeries with that money. She has said that over and over again. And sometimes that's accompanied by we don't know where the money went. We don't know where the money is. It's a black box. Now, I don't know what's all intended with a comment like that in the context of responding to my allegations. First of all, I would say that managing money in the healthcare system anywhere is probably one of the most complex jobs that you can do. You really have to be able to read a balance sheet. And there is all kinds of information that's available or that can be requested that will explain everything about how the money is spent. And, I kind of approached my time here with you today because you asked me before Christmas if I would come, and so I had some time to think about that. And I approached it a little bit like I would if I was preparing myself or a minister for an appearance at a parliamentary or legislative hearing. I did a lot of research. I stay pretty up to date on things anyway, but I noticed as part of that research that Alberta Health Services they were probably permitted to post their annual report for 24-25. And if you read that online, you can see that, in fact, the number of surgeries has gone up. You can see that the number of ambulance visits has gone up 10%, ambulatory visits, something like that. Food inspections has gone up something like 47%. This is since 2021. So just so this idea, where is the money? Well, read the reports. And in terms of the surgical piece, first of all, sometimes it's kind of described as, well, there was $3.5 billion, and almost makes it sound like that money was for surgeries. And it's clear from all the public documentation, there wasn't $3.5 billion given for additional surgeries. That was the overall increase to the AHS budget over that time period. And at least while I was there, and until quite recently, that was for the AHS, the one healthcare provider. So that's the whole scope of healthcare: labs, diagnostics, ambulance, continuing care, acute care, emergency, all of it. So to suggest that $3.5 billion was just for additional surgeries, that's very misleading. And then to say that with all that money, AHS never increased the number of surgeries that they're doing. Well, AHS until recently was responsible for the full surgical load. And yes, some of those surgeries are delivered by chartered surgical facilities. They have been for a long time. since before I was the CEO, and they continue to be. I have been accused in the last year, Danielle Smith, others have said that I wanted to cancel the contracts. I was trying to close chartered surgical facilities. I happened to listen to her on your show, actually, Ryan, in December. And on that show, I think she said something like that I had actually signed contracts. I mean, they were for 15 years, and that never happened before. And why would the CEO sign contracts for 15 years? I don't know what she was talking about. I would say that chartered surgical facilities have been an important part of the healthcare system for a long time. They will continue to be, but they have a place in the system. There was a really great editorial recently by a former AHS employee who described this. These are for low complex procedures, pregnancy terminations, cataracts, low complex limbs like shoulders, knees. They do not do emergency surgery. They do not do complex surgery. They don't have ICUs. They don't have blood banks. They do great work. What I'm about to say is not a reflection on the quality of work, but when something goes wrong, because things do go wrong sometimes, they have to call an ambulance. They have a place in the system. And it is really important to maintain and have full capacity in hospital where you can do the full range of procedures. And there have been decisions made by AHS over the years that show that there's been a greater and greater share of budget that has been oriented to chartered surgical facilities. And to try to somehow portray that now that that's evidence that government policy was being undermined, the public record does not support a statement like that.
Well, I want to get you to respond to something that the Premier said back in February. The audience, first you're going to hear from journalist Jason Markusoff, and then you'll hear from Premier Danielle Smith. This was back on February 28th, about 6-7 weeks after you'd been fired. And this ties into your comments around surgical facilities and surgeries being canceled and the like. We'll hear the clip. I'll get you to respond. Here it is.
Your government hired Athana Mentzelopoulos, and she was executing a lot of the restructuring. You brought her in at that time. Are you telling the public, are you telling people here, are you telling us that you believe that she was just this AHS, like, longtime crony, standing in the way of what the government wanted?
And Jason, again, just we're going with one question, one follow-up.
That's fine. I'll answer that.
I'm not as good a counter as
that's
some
fine.
people are.
I'll answer that. Well, I think you're friends with her, so maybe you can ask her yourself. I won't presume to speak for the former CEO, but what I will say is that there will be a very robust statement of defense that the minister will be filing on our behalf. And we ended that contract because we needed some new leadership going in the new direction. The new leadership going in the new direction has to be satisfied that the job, waking up every single day, is figuring out how to improve performance at the 100+ facilities run by Alberta Health Services, not figuring out how to shut down everybody else.
Not figuring out how to shut down everybody else. Do you take that personally?
I try not to take anything personally. I was in public service for 32 years. They're difficult jobs. I know a lot of people are very dismissive of, public servants, but they are important jobs, and you do build a lot of resilience. I'm not sure which part of that quote you want me to respond to, but I'm not friends with Jason Markusoff.
I'll give you a chance to hit up that water and clear your throat. If you're just joining us, we're talking to former Alberta Health Services CEO Athana Mentzelopoulos in an exclusive feature interview presented by Mercedes-Benz Edmonton West. When we come back, I want to ask you to respond to allegations that you've been supplying documents, privileged or confidential documents, to journalists, including Markusoff and Carrie Tate, whose name has surfaced throughout this. Carrie Tate, the Globe and Mail reporter, who's been at the center of the Globe's reporting around this alleged procurement controversy. I'm going to look into our Real Talk live chat as well, powered by Park Power, for those of you that are joining us live, either watching on YouTube or elsewhere, to get your comments, questions perhaps that you'd like to put in front of the former AHS CEO. Frankly, this conversation wouldn't happen without the support of Real Talk partners like our friends at California Closets of Canada. If your 2026 resolution, if your plan includes getting organized and getting on track, nobody does it better than California Closets. This is a proud Canadian-owned company who manufactures all their installations right here in Alberta and guarantees them for life, with custom closets, systems, and solutions for the entire home, including laundry rooms, entertainment centers, dream walk-in closets, even garage storage systems. They do it all, and they can work with any budget. It all starts with a free consultation. You can request that. You can get that in the books today by visiting their website. That's californiaclosets.ca. Now, nobody's really thinking of getting up on rooftops right now and installing solar panels, but come spring, that's exactly what the team at Kubi Renewable Energy is going to be doing, which means that right now is the perfect time to get in touch with them, get your solar quote, understand what government incentives may be available, ask any questions you may have about the advancements made in solar technology, and of course get their engineers to work on designing your custom system. Kubi provides innovative solar solutions for every home and business. They're one of Canada's busiest, and they've just celebrated 10 years. You can request that free solar quote today by visiting their website, kubi.ca. That's kuby.ca. Friesen Brothers, a proud Alberta institution for more than 70 years and a proud partner of this show. Friesen Brothers has always known as a family-owned business that the best family time happens around good food. And that's what they do. In 16 different Alberta locations, you'll find Friesen Brothers. Want to make sure that you're aware of their Ukrainian feast that's going down this weekend. That's the 10th and 11th of January, a vibrant celebration of Ukrainian cuisine at your local Friesen Brothers Fresh Market stores, as well as High Prairie from 4 to 8 p.m., just $25 per person, all you can eat. You can check out their website, friesen.com, for more information. And as many of you may look to get organized, get your retirement planning kicked into the next gear, or simply ensure that the business that you're building is well equipped for future challenges, the team at North Road Investment Council is ready to talk to you. Did you know the Canadian stock market returned nearly 32% over the last year? The Canadian Mutual Fund is outperforming this return last year. When it comes to investing, more and more private clients and institutions are asking the same question. If most mutual funds are not keeping up with the benchmark, why not just own the benchmark itself? The team at North Road Investment Council builds customized passive portfolios designed to capture index returns, but with a strong focus on tax management and matching your values and preferences. If you're in an earlier stage of building your wealth, the team at North Road can also work with you on an hourly basis, where you can have a professional review your current investment strategy, your insurance needs, as well as develop a customized financial plan. You can connect with Marshall, Carey, and the North Road Investment Council team by visiting their website at northroadic.com. Athana Mentzelopoulos, our guest, in an exclusive interview here on Real Talk. It's been alleged that you have stolen documents. It's been alleged that you have provided confidential or privileged documents to journalists. This podcaster, David Wallace, is getting more attention on this show than he's ever had on this show in past, but he's gone on the record talking about this as well. The Premier has alluded to it. I've not heard her plainly state it, but we'll get to David Wallace on the record here, and then I want to give you an opportunity to respond. Here he is. This is the host of the Political Dark Arts Report.
Look, we know Athana Mentzelopoulos stole government documents. Everybody knows it. We know they were distributed to reporters. Carrie Tate, do you have those documents? How about you, Jason Markashoff? How about you, Janet French? Do you have those documents? Are you in possession of stolen documents? Fair answer. For a fair question, will I get a fair answer? No, because they're dishonest, one-sided activist motherfuckers.
Well, we know that Carrie's in possession of them because she sent that email to reporters. She sent that email to reporters and got an earful from lawyers saying, you know, these documents are privileged, right?
She broke the law.
Did you steal documents? Did you make documents available to Carrie Tate or other journalists?
Well, what those two are talking about there, I think, is a September 24th story by Carrie Tate. She had, I think, an exclusive story where she had obtained the investigation reports. Now, it's kind of ironic to listen to that proxy campaign there, because that is what they're talking about. And the one individual, Wallace, actually claimed since, I think, June that he had the investigation report. I certainly didn't give it to him. I did not give it to Carrie Tate either. I actually got it from Carrie Tate. She sent me those reports prior to publishing the story. She wanted a comment from me. And that's how I got those reports. I did not give those reports to her. I think that anybody who reads Carrie Tate's reporting carefully, and I do, I learn a lot whenever Carrie Tate and Tom Cordoso, others, who I should say have been as much of a target of this proxy campaign as I have. I learn a lot, and I think a careful reading would show you that she has referred to documents that I couldn't have access to because they're dated after my termination. So, yeah, but that's been something that's been part of this proxy campaign. And you're right, it is something that the Premier, that Danielle Smith, has kind of alluded to from time to time. And, you know, maybe there's a part of my ego that would love to think that I'm some big mastermind in the media, but I'm not.
Have you ever feared for your safety, or do you fear for your safety?
I'm hesitating to answer that because I don't want to say something that's just going to precipitate more attacks on me from, you know, whether it's the proxy campaign. I will say that going back to the fall, through this proxy campaign, Wallace offered $10,000 to, he said he would give $10,000 to charity to anybody who would do an expose on me. He particularly pointed to Carrie Tate from the Globe and Mail and Nate Pike, who has the Breakdown website. I guess that wasn't fruitful for him, because then he increased it to $50,000.
We'll note that Nate Pike is the podcaster who, as far as I know, I've not followed the story very closely, but I believe he's being sued by Mr. Moraes, unless that lawsuit's been canceled, correct? I mean, there's a lot of the spider web here extends in a lot of directions.
There is, yes. The $10,000 went up to $50,000. So he said he'll give $50,000 to anybody who would do an expose on me, because there's all these things that need to be revealed about me. And he said he would give it to any charity and on behalf of anyone in the media. And I'm not sure if it was, you know, a reflection of that not working out, but that then evolved into an offer of $100,000. And he said that he had been empowered to do this. He said that it could be multiples of $100,000s of dollars to anyone who would give information to him through what he called a rat line that would lead to criminal charges against me. And I wasn't the only target of that. There were others. That's a lot of money. And I'm not worried about anybody putting in a tip line that could lead to criminal charges. I was a public servant for a very long time. I had top secret clearance with the federal government for a period of time. I do have a sibling that sometimes accuses me of fashion crimes. There's a particular kind of sandal that he really dislikes.
People can relate.
Yeah.
You don't wear socks with the sandals, do you?
I'm not answering that question.
Okay,
yeah.
On advice of your lawyer.
Yes. Lawyers.
Let me get serious for a second. Cactus Sheriff is in our live chat right now and says, oof, that safety question looks like it hit her like a truck. Maybe I can ask you about the personal and the obvious professional toll that this entire situation has taken on you. We'll reframe that question.
Yeah, well, I mean, these individuals, or at least one of them with this proxy campaign, has said that he was coming to my neighborhood. He said he talked to my neighbors. He said they didn't like me. I've had to go and talk to my neighbors and warn them. And that's like that's really hard to do.
As far as you know, has anyone showed up at your house?
Not as far as I know. Not as far as I know, but they've said that they're coming. They said at one point, I think Wallace said that he had put out a call to everyone that he'd ever worked with. He went back to his old Moscow days, and people were on planes coming. This was when I think he said he was doing his tour, where he was coming to find me or find dirt on me. And he said, these people are all on planes and hell is going to follow. And, again, I've tried to be clinical, I guess, about this and say, this campaign, this is a proxy campaign. It's got all the classic attributes of a proxy campaign. It is constructed to intimidate me, harass me. It is constructed to make me doubt myself. I try to be clinical about that. But then I also think that a lot of time when people get hurt or something bad happens, sort of the last thing they say is, I didn't believe this could happen. So I've also tried to be realistic.
The NDP's long been calling for an independent public inquiry into this entire alleged scandal. If an independent public inquiry were called tomorrow, if it was called today, what do you think would be the single most important or significant document or testimony that you think might fundamentally change how Albertans understand what happened at AHS, or maybe what's happening at AHS?
Well, I want to preface that by saying I've tried to keep track of all the different investigations that are going on. So, and I think I count 13, maybe 14. There's the obvious ones, the Auditor General and the RCMP, and then there's the Wyant report. Danielle Smith herself has said that she had 2 separate deputy ministers look into this. She also said that the lawyers who prepared their statement of defense interviewed everybody involved. I think at one point she sort of characterized that as an investigation. Dan Williams said that there was an internal audit at finance. He also has said that he himself is doing a review in his ministry. There was reference to a PricewaterhouseCoopers report at some point. There was, right from the beginning, a reference to a new or an ongoing or still a review at AHS. I think there's ethics. The ethics commissioner is doing something. And I can tell you that I also put in a complaint to the public interest commissioner. You asked about whistleblowers. I never saw myself as a whistleblower. When you're the head of an entity in the way that I was, and this was true when I was a deputy minister as well, I think I always saw myself more in terms of the accountabilities that I held in terms of how to respond to whistleblowers, how to deal fairly, appropriately with whistleblowing complaints. I didn't really see myself as a whistleblower. After my termination, I was receiving some information from people in government that was concerning, and which I passed along to the public interest commissioner because there was nothing I could do with it. And it was as a result of a conversation that I ended up having with that office that I realized I still had the opportunity to submit a complaint there. And I did submit 2 complaints, one for mismanagement of funds and staff and one for reprisal. And for the mismanagement, he has indicated that he is holding on his decision whether to do an investigation. He's waiting to see the outcome of other processes. But for reprisal, he agreed that an investigation was warranted. He said he wouldn't commence it until my civil case was complete. So that could be a while. But he said he had taken actions to preserve or to make sure that documents were preserved. So that's a long way to answer your question. You asked about a public inquiry and where would be the testimony. If you read the Wyant report, one of the first things that he says, and it's in a letter that he attached at the beginning of the report to Danielle Smith, he actually talked about AHS employees. And he talked about current employees. He wasn't talking about me. And he was very, very complimentary of the AHS employees that he talked to. And in some ways, I actually think that was the most important part of his report. Because in some ways, the thing that I regret about being in the situation I'm in is that it does seem to have triggered more criticism of people at AHS, and they don't deserve that. There are wonderful people at AHS who are so committed to what they're trying to do, and they are working in really difficult circumstances much of the time. I think there would be a lot of people at AHS who would have something very important to say about all of this.
Do you believe that there's anybody? I mean, that's an impossible question. I'm asking you to speculate, but it's hard to imagine, considering the treatment that you say that you've been subjected to. By the way, Matthew, who's watching us live, just kicked $50 into our YouTube super chat. This is a way for people to better their chances of having their comments read and contribute to the show. Good. And his $50, the comment attached to it is, please get her a damn security system. I don't expect that to be a cute comment that would make you laugh. I can see the impact that his comment had on you, but considering what you're telling us today, it's hard to imagine that more people would feel like they could or would want to step forward and speak out. Is that what needs to happen in your estimation here?
You know, I really worry about what is the takeaway when people look at this, and I made the decision I made. I am accountable for the decision I made. I made a decision a year ago, and you know, I could not have anticipated what the year would look like.
What's the decision that you made a year ago? A year ago, you were fired, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I made a decision to fight back, and you know, there's a lot of things you can say about bureaucrats and the public service, and we're living in a time, and I'm not going to say that, you know, it's worse than ever or whatever, but there is a really strong negative sentiment frequently about public servants, which I find very lamentable. I feel very privileged to have been able to work in close quarters with some of the finest public servants in the country, federally, in British Columbia, and in Alberta. I was trained in fearless advice, faithful implementation. And it's a trade-off for a public servant. And I never wanted to be in the public light. I've never had that aspiration, but I really loved the work that I did, and I worked with some amazing people. And again, I'm not looking for any sympathy. There's a kind of job that if you aspire to it and if you work in it in the public sector, whether that's at AHS or in government, where you will be expected to work 7 days a week and be on call 24 hours a day, and you will be expected to be found if you're on vacation, and that's just the nature of the job, that's the nature of the work. And I loved that. And there's a lot of people who really love that. There's a lot of people who find out that it's not for them. And I also, I was Deputy Minister of Finance in 2 provinces. I as I was preparing and going back through the various research that I've done, I think at one point last year, somebody in the opposition called me a fiscal hawk. And I don't think they meant it as a compliment, but that's how I took it. I've written austerity budgets. I have had to find massive cuts in public service programs. I've done big reorgs of national programs. And I've worked up until a certain point. I worked for people who expected fearless advice. They wanted it. They weren't going to pretend it didn't happen. They weren't going to pretend that they didn't hear it. They weren't going to pretend that they did or didn't make a decision that they made. And I think that that's what, when you really think about it, that's what you want from public servants. You want people who are going to work their can off and make sure that elected officials are getting the best possible advice so that when they make the decision, because they have the privilege to make those decisions, maybe it's a curse sometimes, that they have the best advice. And I think that if people believe in the public service, at the senior ranks in particular, that giving their best advice is going to ruin their life, I don't think that's what you want from the public service.
If you're just joining our live stream presented by California Closets, we're talking to former Alberta Health Services CEO Athana Mentzelopoulos on the 1-year anniversary of her dismissal. In our live chat, powered by Park Power, your friendly local utilities provider, Cherie says, as an AHS employee, I second what Athana is saying. This is the UCP, not AHS. Cactus Sheriff says that's the only way that this government's going to be held accountable. If there's enough people speaking out from the inside, they can't sue or threaten them all. Others, Mark, for example, says, what if nobody fought back? Just think about it. Shirley says, quote, I made a decision to fight back. That takes so much courage and energy. Daniel says, thank you for speaking out, Athana. Hopefully you'll be the first step in making healthcare in our government better in the province for everyone. Kind of a personal question from Just Joe, but she says litigation against anybody is not cheap. How is she funding this battle against the machine in suing the government?
Well, I don't know how I'm ever going to thank the folks who put together a GoFundMe last spring. It involved people from all over the province. I don't even know how to begin to say thank you for that. I mean, obviously it had a impact in terms of being able to address the financial portion of this, but the emotional impact was also very significant. And so I would say thank you to everybody who helped with that. The costs are quite a bit beyond that. I'm not complaining. I made the decision to do this.
So far, if I'm looking at the correct GoFundMe, it raised about $800,000. You're saying that your costs to this point exceed $800,000.
Yes.
You're suing for $1.7 million.
I am.
Ken K in our live chat says when you're talking about 7 days a week, burning the candle at both ends, he says, yeah, but I'm paraphrasing his comments, says, but it's a pretty nice contract.
Yep.
Comes with the territory.
Yep, absolutely.
Did this job to this point in your career represent the pinnacle as you saw it?
I'm not sure. I was deputy minister for a very long time, and I'm a geek. I happily.
This show is hosted by a geek and is presented to an audience of geeks and nerds, so we like this stuff. Everybody knows that. Everybody in this audience knows that the deputy minister is a pretty plum gig, pretty cool gig. There's a lot of pressure that comes with it.
Yeah.
But you don't lose your job, or you don't have to campaign for your job every 4 years. There's, I guess there's ways you can lose your job. Certainly,
absolutely.
But you don't have to campaign. You don't have to knock doors. You don't have to fundraise. You don't have to kiss babies.
No, you don't have to kiss babies. That's true.
Go on.
It is true that the compensation as a deputy minister and at AHS, I believe it was very, very generous. And I would say that in my entire career, 32 years, I never asked for a raise. And when I was appointed at AHS as CEO, I said, just give me whatever the last guy was making. I was not looking for, and which was generous. And is this the pinnacle? The reason I said I'm kind of a geek is that if you're a deputy minister, actually the pinnacle job is the deputy minister to the premier. And I never, that's a job that I did not do. But deputy minister of finance is an incredible job. It gives you reach into every corner of the government. I probably was a pain in the butt for a lot of people because I treat, I believe, taxpayer money like my own, and I'm personally pretty stingy.
Looking back, is there anything that you would have done differently, like strategically or maybe even politically, to protect not just your own position, but maybe bigger picture to protect the investigation?
I don't think so. I mean, ironically, the Danielle Smith, this theme that she appears to have launched as part of, that's been picked up by this proxy campaign, about the investigation in British Columbia. That wasn't my investigation. I didn't conduct it. I didn't know about it for months. I had very, very little to do with it. But there was an extensive report that was done by the Ombudsman in British Columbia, Jay Chalk. And I've read that report. I actually brought it today because I thought you might, just because of the story in the Globe this morning. I still have my original copy of that report. And I would consider it very useful reading for any public servant. And the reason I raise it is because it talks a lot. That report has a lot of information about the right way to do these kinds of investigations. And I had a lot of experience over the years about how to do these things appropriately, fairly. And I was working with people who were professional, who were very committed people. They knew how to do these things as well. So I think that the integrity there was excellent. I can't say that I ever really thought about protecting my job in that process until it became evident that I probably was going to lose my job over it. But even at that point, like, what do you do?
Do you think that was losing your job inevitable at some point? Did you start to feel like the anvil was about to drop? Were you caught by surprise?
To a certain extent, I was caught by surprise. I think when you're as old as I am, as old as the hills, and you've been in the public service for a long time, and if you've read my court filings, which I don't want to get into, but I think they give a pretty good indication of how things had evolved. But I think I'm human, and so anybody who's human hopes that it's not going to turn out in the worst way, right? Like you always hope. I am a bit of a pessimist in general, probably. I remember when the COVID pandemic happened, a friend of mine emailed me and said, you were finally right.
We last interviewed the Premier Danielle Smith here in studio on December 9th. People can check that out on our YouTube channel. They can, of course, check it out wherever they get their podcasts as well. In that interview, I had a chance to ask her about an announcement that had been made by Matt Jones. What's his title? Minister of Hospital and Alberta, this audience will know already. Of course, Alberta has 4 different health ministers essentially right now. Matt Jones is the Minister of Hospital and Surgical Health Services. The Alberta government announced a cancellation of the procurement of private surgical facilities in Lethbridge and Red Deer. And at that time, the minister stated on the record, quote, concerns were raised about the procurement practices and procedures and handling of conflict of interests in AHS procurement. He says, I'm pleased to share, this was on the 3rd of December, the procurements for the Central and South Zone surgical facilities have been canceled. There was a tie-in as well to Mr. Mraish with MH Care. Maybe not directly, but there is indisputably a tie-in there. When that announcement was made just about 5 weeks ago, did you feel in some way exonerated? Your thoughts on it? Your eyebrows raised as soon as I brought it up here.
Sorry. There's been a few things that I've heard in the legislature that I've had to replay because I thought I don't think I heard that right. I've never been a person who took any satisfaction in being right. I just don't. I don't think that this process is over. I don't know how it's going to ultimately turn out. So I try not to give myself any moment where I think, that I've been exonerated, to use your word. I think there's...
But was there some sort of a personal, like for me, Let me give you my version of it. I was fired from a terrestrial radio station 5 years ago. When I was fired, I was ordered to sell my shares as part of the employee share purchase plan at $2.67. That company's share price is now 3.5 cents. I feel some sense of personal satisfaction around that.
Good.
Aside from the implications around the retirements of people that I care about that work for that company. But you get what I'm saying. There's some sort of that lands with me personally in a way that I don't necessarily always talk about. But internally, I feel like that company was not on the right track in a lot of ways. And I take some sort of personal satisfaction from it. That's my story, my version, my world. What about yours with those two surgical facilities?
I don't think that I'm at a point where I would make any kind of conclusion in the way that you have.
I guess I just make everything all about myself.
That's okay.
I want to get to more comments here in our live chat powered by Park Power. We're talking to Athana Mentzelopoulos. I'm assuming it's still okay for you to stick around. We asked you for 90 minutes. Last time I asked for a 90-minute interview, I can't even remember when.
Well,
there's a lot of ground to cover.
Well, I personally, I don't really enjoy the sound of my voice. So if it's okay with you, I'm here as long as you need me.
Okay. Well, real talkers have a lot of questions for you and things that they want to ask you. There's also a lot of people, I have mixed feelings around, doing a direct and what should be a tough interview with very plainly stated questions, reading all the praise that we're seeing in the live chat for you. But I will acknowledge that there's a bunch of real talkers that are making contributions in the super chat. And essentially the general tone of what they're talking about is that they admire your courage and they admire the fact that you're speaking truth to power and you're willing to come on the show and talk about it. That's been the gist. And real talkers, I hope you feel that I've accurately represented the messages that you've been passing along to Athana Mentzelopoulos. More in a bit, including big picture, like unfinished business. What would you be doing if you were still there? How do you fix Alberta Health Services? I want to ask you that in a second. These live chat comments that you're seeing here on our YouTube are presented by our friends at Park Power. They power our live chat every single show. This is your friendly local utilities provider with electricity, natural gas, and internet. Let me put it in plain language. When you move your business over to Park Power, your service isn't going to get any worse. Your internet's not going to be any slower. There's going to be no hassles. You're just going to pay less. Plus, a portion of your bill every single month is going to go to a nonprofit, a charity, and you can choose which one right here in the province of Alberta. You can learn more about that at parkpower.ca. And if you check out parkpower.ca/realtalk, you'll find exclusive promo codes that could knock up to $150 off your very first bill if you bundle electricity, natural gas, and internet with Park Power. Learn the details, view their plans, and move your business over to Park Power today at parkpower.ca/realtalk. If you like the jacket that I'm wearing today, I'm happy to let you know that I picked it up just recently at the Helm Clothing. Now, Johnny and I always marvel at this 3-story retail experience in downtown Edmonton. The Helm Clothing, a beautiful location, just about a block and a half from our studio. I mean, they have spared no expense, and they've boldly opened retail when we're seeing a lot of business move in the opposite direction. I think one of the reasons why they do it and why they thrive, why they've established such a wonderful reputation in the Metro Edmonton region is because of their team, their staff. I mean, the caliber of this luxury casual wear and the custom suits that they have ready for you to check out, of course, is one of the reasons why folks turn to the Helm. But the ability of their team to make you look good, to work with your budget, and of course to help you feel confident is unparalleled. If you're going to shop the Helm Clothing online at thehelmclothing.com, keep in mind that the promo code REALTALK, all one word, will knock 10% off your entire order. That's 10% off your entire order with the promo code REALTALK, all one word, at thehelmclothing.com. And of course, you know how proud we are to be supporting the Royal Alexandra Hospital Foundation in its 125th year. Since its humble beginnings 125 years ago, the Royal Alex, as it's known, has been a major provider of care for our community, starting with just a handful of patient beds within a single building, now 900 beds plus, serving upwards of 500,000 people every year from a geographic landmass covering a third of Canada, if you can wrap your mind around that. We're encouraging you, if you're able, to give generously and be part of the Royal Alex's legacy of care. Give for the future in honor of the past. You can give a one-time gift. You can consider a monthly gift. You can check out givetoroyalalex.org. And don't forget, Tuesdays here on Real Talk, we present Echoes of the Alex. These are the stories of the people, the surgeons, the nurses, the doctors, the porters, the staff, and of course the patients that have all defined the legacy of the Royal Alexandra Hospital over the past 125 years. Again, that's givetoroyalalex.org. Athana Mentzelopoulos, our guest, former AHS CEO. You kind of perked up there when I mentioned the Royal Alex. It's a remarkable place, and we've had an opportunity to speak with a former ER doc at the Royal Alex, Dr. Raj Sherman. Of course, you know him in political circles as well. Mm-hmm. What did you think of our interview with Dr. Raj?
Oh, I mean, he can tell you the problems with the system in 30 seconds, and he did. And I think he's been a powerful voice in the last few weeks, him and other physicians. It's been important.
Yeah, he texted me over the Christmas break, and in sadness, he said our interview with him was unfortunately prophetic as he was talking about ER wait times. He talked about the impact that ER wait times have had on his own family. In maddening circumstances, we were flooded with emails to talk@ryanjespersen.com after we talked to Dr. Raj, people sharing their own stories about ER wait times and the like. And of course, most people, I would say people across the country, but in particular in our home province of Alberta, are aware that just a few days before Christmas, a 44-year-old father of 3 died in hospital after waiting more than 8 hours for cardiac care, for attention anyway, for symptoms of a cardiac problem. We spoke to Dr. Brian Wurzba, who's the president of the Alberta Medical Association, earlier this week about this tragedy, and he talked to us about the moral injury that has been inflicted, in particular on doctors and nurses, but I would imagine that something like that is felt across the healthcare system. As an executive, as the most senior executive for Alberta Health Services, the CEO, what did you note when it came to not just the functioning of everything, and certainly not just your fiscal hawk type observations, but about the morale of the thousands of healthcare workers in the province?
Well, actually, when I first started at AHS in December of 2023, it was just on the heels of Danielle Smith having said something to the effect of she was going to send Adriana LaGrange to walk around hospitals and fire people if she thought they weren't doing their job. And that was kind of my entry point into AHS. And I think any human being would understand the kind of impact a comment like that has. There's been so much criticism of AHS, and it's really lamentable, because there's it's being just taken apart now. But in the year that I was there, I met many, many, many people, and they are all committed, whether they're in a management role, but more so because the 97% of the employees are on the front lines. They're committed, they're professional, they're some of the best in the country, maybe in the world. Nurses, physicians, healthcare aides, lab techs. They are dealing with incredible volume. They're all trying to stretch every dollar. And for me, when you're in an organization that size, you're not going to have the opportunity to meet everybody. So tone from the top is really important. And that's something that was always important to me in every job that I did. People are looking, they're watching you, and it's immediately evident if your words and your actions are disconnected, and it sends the wrong message. So in those leadership roles, in government, I think it's true in the private sector as well, you really have to be conscious that you are modeling the behaviors I hate the word authentic, but I'm going to use it in a really authentic way. And
Why do you hate the word authentic? You just think it's overused?
Yeah, I do. Sorry. I keep a list of words I don't like. It's on that list. I've found it very grievous how much criticism there is of the healthcare system, and so much of the kind of narrative almost makes it sound like nothing is happening in the healthcare system. I tried to figure out at one point, like, how many people do you think we touch at AHS in a given day? And it's at least 100,000. You know, there's thousands and thousands of different medical tests that are happening. People are coming into hospitals for appointments, people coming into the emergency room, surgeries, people having babies. In some cases, it's the best day of their life. They're going to take home their new baby. In a lot of cases, it's the worst day of their life. And any one of us who's taken a child into the emergency department and just been sick with worry knows that. And the healthcare system, that's what they're managing every day, is in many cases the worst day of a person's life.
You know, we've heard from several doctors on this show that have said the same thing. And they've often, you know, in the spirit of when someone accesses healthcare in Alberta, they receive some of the best healthcare in the world. Mm-hmm. But the problem is getting people into a position where they can receive those services. And sometimes it's ER wait times, sometimes it's surgical delays, sometimes it's the number of family doctors or the lack of family doctors in different communities. Are you optimistic, or are you confident that healthcare can be healed in Alberta? Some of these issues are systemic across the country. Some of these issues are pervasive around the world. But do you think Alberta can get its healthcare system back on track to the point where we're not talking about surgeons that are twiddling their thumbs because there's not enough OR nurses, or there's OR suites that are empty and there are surgeries that aren't happening, or there's nurses that are leaving the profession because it's just not worth it to them anymore, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera?
Well, there's a lot on that list, and some of it kind of makes my blood boil, what you just said, and in particular where you talked about there's OR space that's not being used, because that's something that you hear Danielle Smith say, Adriana LaGrange say, others, which leaves the impression like, oh, what is AHS doing? They have empty ORs. Like, the system is used based on the budget that is available. And it is very often the case that you will hear, and I'm talking about in the last year, I am not talking about while I was CEO. You will hear Danielle Smith and others say things that only make sense if you go, if one of your assumptions is that there's unlimited budget for healthcare. So when, for example, she talks about surgeries and she says that there's going to be new activity-based costing and there's all this money, and why hasn't AHS done more? And we're going to have a system where the money follows the patient, and the more surgeries you can do, the more money you're going to get. That either that means that money is going to be reallocated from somewhere else into the from somewhere else in the system to the entities that can churn out the most surgeries. In which case you're talking about low acuity facilities that are built to do low complex, high volume surgeries. And keeping in mind that what happens in hospitals, emergency surgery, cancer surgeries, some of these procedures are hours and hours long. And that's part of the challenge in looking at the analysis about how much surgeries cost or who's more efficient. I'm not sure it's fair to say that, well, this facility did 15 surgeries today and you only did one. And it's one 15-hour transplant, which could very well be the one surgery that you're pointing to, and without scraping the surface on that. But if there's ORs that are actually up to code and can be used and are empty, they're empty either because there's no budget or because there are no people. They are not empty because somebody decided that they should be empty. And to imagine that there is unlimited money. And I say this also having been the Deputy Minister of Finance for several years in 2 provinces. There are budgets for everything. And I think as well, just coming back to your question, something that Danielle Smith has said recently, she talks a lot about AHS as a failure. And I think she says, they have failed for the last decade. And one of the things she's really pointed to recently, which I think is apropos of your interview with Dr. Sherman, is she has said that, one of the areas where AHS failed most profoundly is in continuing care. Now, again, you don't have to have worked at AHS or been the CEO to take a look at the annual report from AHS for 24-25, which makes the point that there are not enough continuing care beds. And if somebody in the government says, well, there's these empty beds that AHS isn't using, again, ask yourself, like, maybe there wasn't money to buy those beds. She says that this is a failure of AHS, and she says, and government is going to spend billions, with a B, of dollars to fix it. So you're telling me that there's a problem that requires billions of dollars to fix, and that is a failure of AHS, which receives its funding from government? No. Like, you really have to sort of take apart some of what Danielle Smith and others in government say. You have to look at the data, you have to compare it with other things that they've said. There is not enough capacity in the system. I think everybody can see that. It's been particularly evident in the last few weeks. There are a lot of people who are waiting for spaces in more appropriate levels of care. The government has said that they have accelerated discharge, right? They've said that they're moving people out of the hospitals more quickly. They're getting them to the navigation center where they can get care. I don't know what the navigation center does, but I don't think it provides care. It makes me think of a news story that I read in the Victoria Times Colonist a couple of years ago, where the Jubilee Hospital in Victoria was discharging people who were walking across the street to the bus stop. Sometimes they were still in their hospital pajamas with their belongings in a plastic bag. And there was a woman living in the apartment building behind the bus stop who was seeing people in distress, and she would call an ambulance, and the ambulance would come and take these individuals back across the street into the emergency department. And I don't think that that's the kind of system that you want to set up, where you're sending people out of the hospital before they're ready or to a place where they don't have the appropriate care.
We just did a feature on the Bridge Healing Program, as a matter of fact. I'm not sure if that's on your radar. You're nodding. I'm sure that it is. A partnership between the Royal Alexandra Hospital and the Jasper Place Wellness Center, which is aiming to address this exact issue. We also have an interview coming up, as a matter of fact, with a physician in Ontario. I'm not sure if you heard of Dunn House, but that's another model that they're using that follows a similar idea. M. Aitken in our live chat, powered by Park Power, says we are in a disastrous situation. One big event would send us into a state of chaos at levels we've never seen. It's equivalent to wartime medical care. Dr. Raj said as much in his conversation with us just a short time ago. A reminder of Black Friday, the Edmonton hurricane. We think of events like major MVAs. The Humboldt Broncos bus crash might come to mind, and other challenges where ORs would need to be open and healthcare providers on the front line would need to be available. Ambustion, thank you for your YouTube channel membership, says my dad's doctor started offering private and public options during cancer treatment. Are they turning our public doctors into salespeople? Alberta intends to move to what they're describing as a dual practice system, which is kind of a hybrid, of course, between public and private practice. It's not unique globally, but it would be unique in Canada. Do you have an opinion on whether or not this is something that might improve access to care, that might help in recruitment or retention efforts for physicians? There are many patient advocacy groups, and it should be noted the official opposition NDP as well, that are crying foul with this one big time.
Yeah, I think lots of times the answer is more about math than it is about ideology or partisanship. And I think sometimes the answers that are based on math are unfairly characterized as ideological or partisan. I think it's just the bottom line. It's about math. Do you have the capacity? What is happening with the capacity that is funded? Is it appropriately funded? Is there enough space? And are there enough people? I think that there's a big challenge in North America, certainly in Canada, with the supply of healthcare workers. And I think what you want to do is make sure that we're retaining the ones that we have, treat them well, treat them with respect. Don't say you're going to walk around and fire them.
Noob, try again with $20 into our YouTube super chat. Says the problems with Alberta Health Services are due to government choices. AHS frontline employees know how to fix it, but are never consulted. They're now highly pressured to meet statistics, not to prioritize patient care. He says restructuring is creating chaos. There's a bunch of people that are liking his comment. Does it resonate with you? It looks like it might.
Well, I'm not going to speak about the refocusing in particular because I think that would stray into areas that I have to be very cautious about. But I have done reorganizations of large, complex systems before. One of them was the National Program for Consumer Product Safety, a massive, major overhaul. And again, a national program. And what I will tell you was required to do that. We thought that we would need 2 years to do that. The government at the time, I was in the federal government, it was a minority conservative government, and they wanted it done quickly. They wanted it done in 6 months. And we did it in 6 months. And we did it by sitting down and understanding exactly who was accountable for what and having a system where everybody knew once we flicked the switch to the new system, everybody knew what their accountabilities were going to be. And we had mapped those so that nothing was sort of left behind. Because if you're not careful, and this is true in the healthcare system as well, you could, if you haven't done the careful mapping, if you haven't done the appropriate work on the policies, you could leave something behind, a vital function. And then you don't find out about it until something bad has happened. So I would just say to you that there's, I think, a lot of learning about reorganizations, about doing things like, cutting your management, those kinds of things. I think in general, and this is true, I think, in the private sector as well, people have learned a lot about the unintended consequences of cutting off your own head. You generally want to try to avoid that.
You were in the position as CEO for a relatively short period of time. But in the year since you were dismissed, since you were fired, is there one thing at the top of your list of unfinished business? Is there one thing in particular that you wish that you would have been able to see through to fruition or to accomplish as CEO?
It was on the workforce side. It was, the healthcare system is people. The hospitals, obviously, the capital is vitally important. I think lots of times there's a big disconnect. This is one of the lessons you learn as a deputy minister of finance. No capital without operating. Like, don't build those buildings unless you're ready to pay for everything that's going to be needed to run them. But I think for me, it was really the workforce, not just the sort of the metric pieces. There's a lot of overtime in the healthcare system. There's a lot of utilization of agency nurses. There's a whole bunch of things like that need more attention. But I think in general, it was just the engagement with people, because they're amazing. They're amazing people at AHS. And the ones that I met, I was so appreciative for the time they took with me. And the ones that I wasn't able to meet, I regret that.
Morgan in our live chat says she hopes that when this is all said and done, you'll write a book. Are you considering writing a book?
She's not the first person who has suggested that. And if you think about everything that's happened in the last year, for folks who have followed this closely, I think the challenge would be that, a book, fiction or nonfiction, has to be believable. And there's just so much that has happened that is unbelievable.
Athana Mentzelopoulos, former CEO of Alberta Health Services, in her first feature interview. We appreciate you granting us this interview. We appreciate your candor, appreciate your public service, and we wish you well moving forward. Thank you for doing this.
Thanks for having me.
Real Talkers, you can let us know what you think about what you've just heard. If you're watching us live right now on our live stream presented by California Closets, we'll be getting into the live chat in just a moment, powered by Park Power. You can leave a comment on our YouTube episode if you're watching this later. Leave a comment on Spotify if that's where you're catching this podcast. And, of course, you can always send us an email to talk@ryanjespersen.com. It is Thursday today, and every Thursday, as proud Albertans, we have a chance, courtesy of our friends at Play Alberta, to focus on an Alberta win. These are Albertans that are making big moves, big strides. We're talking about big achievements on the national and international stage. And in this week's Alberta Wins, brought to you by Play Alberta, we feature one of Canada's rising winter sports stars just a short time before the 2026 Winter Olympic Games kicks off. And this story happens right here on home snow, if you will. Canadian snowboarder Elizabeth Hosking captured World Cup gold in the women's halfpipe at the Calgary stop of the FIS Snowboard World Cup. This 24-year-old from Quebec laid down an 82.5-point run to take top spot. This was her first World Cup victory and the first time that a Canadian woman has ever won a World Cup halfpipe event on home soil. Pretty cool stuff. Hosking delivered that winning run under the lights at Win Sports Super Pipe down in Calgary, backing it up despite a fall in her second attempt. Xiaotong Wu from China took silver. Switzerland's Isabelle Locher earned bronze. But this is a particularly meaningful result for the Canadian, for Hosking, who missed an entire season after a concussion in 2023. She finished third here at this event last year. Now, keep in mind, she's also a 2023 World Championship silver medalist, and this victory gives her momentum as the 2026 Winter Games in Milan Cortina draw closer. Also, a big shout out to fellow Canadians Brooke Daunt and Felicity Jeremiah, who had strong showings down in Calgary, placing 5th and 7th, respectively, among the women. 3 top 10 finishes down in Calgary. Johnny, can we get to what Elizabeth Hosking had to say on this? She had a brief comment. This is hilarious. This might be the shortest clip you ever hear on Real Talk, but here she is after her gold medal run in Calgary.
It will 82.5, and Elizabeth Hosking takes the win.
To get my first World Cup win on home soil is insane. I have no words.
She has no words, and so we'll use ours. A big shout out to Elizabeth Hosking, World Cup gold medalist in the women's halfpipe at the Calgary stop of the FIS Snowboard World Cup. That is an Alberta win, celebrating athletes who make our province and our nation proud. You know, of course, Albertans are winning every single day at playalberta.ca and by way of the Play Alberta app. You know, a winner in Sturgeon County just scored $100,000 on Cash Machine. Did you know that all revenue generated by Play Alberta stays right here in Alberta? If you like what you're hearing, download the app today to get started with casino, sports, and lottery all in one app. You got to be 18 or over to play, and if you do decide to gamble, please use your game sense. Now, Johnny, we do have a big announcement here. When it comes to Play Alberta and our Play Alberta partnership moving forward, they're clearing up their suite at an upcoming Oilers game. It's going to be Saturday, the 21st of March, and it's going to be Real Talk night. And they're making it possible for us here at Real Talk to bring friends of the show along with us as the Edmonton Oilers face the Tampa Bay Lightning. Now, how can you qualify to win? It's simple. Keep your eye out for a story of an Alberta win and send it to us. Put it on our radar in an email to talk@ryanjespersen.com. Make sure you have Alberta wins in the subject line. This could be a big bake sale. This could be kids who accomplished something huge at a science fair. It could be a random act of kindness or, of course, something major on the international stage. We're proud to celebrate Alberta wins each and every Thursday right here on Real Talk. That game's coming up March 21st. Make sure you get your Alberta win sent in today to talk@ryanjespersen.com. Alberta Wins proudly presented every Thursday by our friends at Play Alberta. Well, our thanks to Athana Mentzelopoulos for an extended length interview, an exclusive interview here on Real Talk. The show's technical director, John Hicks, has been hard at work behind the scenes, and I know both of us have been keeping an eye on a live chat that has been absolutely booming today. Real Talkers have a lot to say, and we want to make sure that we give you the floor here. Michael says, a tremendous interview. He says, I'm embarrassed to admit, says Michael, I haven't subscribed to the Real Talk YouTube channel until just now. He says, anyway... he says Michael is claiming, Johnny, as he hit subscribe, it was showing him we had 34.9 thousand subscribers. He says it's now at 35. So our thanks to Michael. Michael, if you were the tipping point to getting us to 35,000, we sure appreciate it. Dwayne says, notice how the UCP and Danielle Smith, the Premier, refused to extend the contract for Alberta's Auditor General, Doug Wiley, who is still investigating the UCP's so-called corrupt care scandal. Chantel chiming in as well says, the next interview, now that we've had Mentzelopoulos on the show, we got to make sure we get Pierre Poilievre on the show. Chantel, we're working on it behind the scenes. Many of you referencing Dr. Dina Hinshaw in our live chat, which I thought was really interesting. I do think that there are some parallels. I won't stretch too far to try to draw lines where they don't exist, but there are some parallels to these stories, including, I think, probably one most significant one, the public cost or the potential toll that it can take in these super high-profile roles, including, or even most especially in healthcare, and I might include education in there as well. The real DK Gray, what's up, DK, says in 30 years around government, up to and including dealing with 3 different premiers, DK says, I've never seen anything like the open corruption of the UCP. We have all of you sharing your personal stories when it comes to healthcare. Chantel says nothing more exciting than fear for your job when you're doing all you can to save lives. She wonders, what lives have these politicians saved? Different roles, different jobs. We'll take your point, Chantel. DW pointing out proudly, says back in 2018, Alberta Health Services was ranked among the best healthcare system administrators or administrations in the world. Many of you are taking this opportunity to share who you'd like to have on the show next. You can always send us an email to talk@ryanjespersen.com. Mark Doran in the chat. Mark, of course, one of the founders of the Polluter Pay Federation, says, Athana was right. Once one gets past wait lists in Alberta Health, the overworked health professionals, from surgeons to the people who clean the hospital rooms, are incredibly good. Mark says, they saved my life with smiles. Others of you are just joining the live stream now, starting the show from the very beginning. Christine says, this has been a profoundly enlightening interview. She says, the trauma, the stress that I see on Athana's face and in her voice will stay with me. She says she was an outstanding guest. MA referencing former Alberta Medical Association President Dr. Paul Parks, we would call him the past president, says he just recently shared the current state of healthcare today, says it is in crisis. She says, and it is already failed. I recommend you follow Dr. Parks on social media if you don't already. That guy's shooting from the hip and speaking from a point of experience and credibility, and I would recommend that you check that out. I appreciate Ambustion saying that he's going to be sending this episode to all of his family members. Thanks to everybody that'll be sharing this. Says, I want to follow up once she can speak more freely. It is difficult. It's a bit of a challenge when you're interviewing someone who's, actively involved in something before the courts. It's most difficult with politicians because, or I would say it's especially difficult with politicians because the status of a trial or legal action gives a politician an easy out to simply state that I cannot and will not be commenting on any matters before the courts. That's not what you had here today. Not entirely. There are things that Ms. Mentzelopoulos cannot share or will not share, in particular because they would not be advantageous to her lawsuit against the government. She doesn't want to shoot herself in the foot on the show, but I would commend her for relatively significant candor in speaking about not just what she saw and not just how it was dealt with, but her personal experiences along the way. that situation with those two podcasters who are probably more famous now at the end of this episode than they ever have been truly is remarkable. And that's a story that's just getting started. You can read in reporting in the Globe and Mail, the Edmonton Journal has been covering it as well, and perhaps other publications across the country, that one of those podcasters, James DiFiore, has claimed and initially claimed in hesitating around handing over his devices, I believe it to be his phone, to law enforcement that was executing that warrant or that demand from the courts, that he could not hand over his phone because it had been provided to him by CSIS. It has since been reported that he did ultimately surrender those devices. That's a story that we will keep an eye on. Marie says, the stuff around healthcare, what we're talking about here, many of these things have been issues since Ralph Klein. Ralph Klein started the entire process of dismantling healthcare. Cassandra says, what my friend just had to go through with her heart surgery is a testament to how much this government has screwed up our healthcare system. Super Chat Ken, what's up, Ken? Says, I encourage people to check out International Healthcare System Profiles from the Commonwealth Fund. That's International Healthcare System Profiles from the Commonwealth Fund. It demonstrates just how different European systems are. Ken, if I can tag on to that, I would recommend that all of you read Andre Picard's recent feature in the Globe and Mail. Andre is arguably and probably the best health journalist in the country, and he wrote about a month ago about Alberta's proposed dual practice model, and he points out some of the inconsistencies or even some of the fallacies that we're seeing in the arguments and comparisons to other healthcare providers in other jurisdictions, including Europe, and it's a really well-written piece. I would say it's even influenced to a certain degree how I feel about all this, and it's always great to have a chance to read Andre. The guy's been writing about this for decades. Alberta Girl says, many ORs are closed because there's absolutely no budget for personnel. Gilles says what we're talking about with healthcare has parallels, almost exactly the argument against private education as well, says Gilles. Not all students are the same. So if schools can reject complex students, private schools take on the burden at significant increase. I mean, there are many parallels in conversations that we have between healthcare and education for sure. Tony says, please stop comparing our healthcare system to Europe. I would imagine that there was some of this in the live chat. I was doing my best to pay attention to it, Real Talkers, but obviously giving my full attention to our guest as well. Tony says, European countries invest in all public services like healthcare, education, daycare through taxes. We complain about too much taxes here. So what the hell do people actually want? Fair point. Nick D says, Athana was bang on with her comments on surgeries. My child was bumped from cardiac surgery, says Nick, because the surgery before went long, over 9 hours. He had the surgery the next day. Nick says that was 4 years ago. Nick, we trust that there was a positive result there. People are talking about Ralph Klein's impact on healthcare, and healthcare wasn't exactly rosy before Ralph Klein took over, but Ralph Klein, as everybody knows, in his quest to get Alberta to debt-free status, did make pretty significant decisions. I've talked about before, including blowing up the Holy Cross Hospital, the hospital where all 6 of my family members were born. That's just one example. But balancing the Alberta budget at that point came at a cost. And now with the luxury, if you want to call it that, of 30 years of hindsight, we can see the true cost of some of those cost-cutting measures. Some of you continue to share your personal experiences. Cassie says what Athana is describing, that story in the Victoria Times columnist, that's I believe that's what you're referencing, or perhaps not. Cassie, my apologies, says that's what happened to my friend after heart surgery. Says they let her out too soon. And then they didn't send her to rehabilitation, to rehab that had been set up because in many circumstances, one hand doesn't know what the other hand is doing. Some of you pointing out that mental health patients have been discharged to the drop-in centers in Calgary because of lack of housing. I really do encourage you to check out the Bridge Healing Program. You can just check out royalalex.org/bridge healing if you want to learn more about that. That's one that I feel very strongly about personally and that we're proud to support. And by the way, Christine, we did see your comment in our live chat. It is Dr. Andrew Boosery that I'm referring to. He's the one most closely tied to the Dunhouse project in Ontario, and that's something that this show will have. Dr. Boosery's on the road right now, as a matter of fact. I believe he's in California, but we are in contact with him, and he will be joining us within the next couple of weeks or so. Lightning Rod says, the show, wow. Athana's right. It is all math. I don't know about you guys. That actually resonated with me strongly. I appreciated that comment of hers when she said a lot of what she does, or a lot of healthcare management, if I paraphrase, is about math and not about ideology. And in some circumstances, I wish that we could get more to that point. I understand that people feel very strongly about certain elements of healthcare, like the foundational principles, the Canada Health Act, universal healthcare that Canadians have long been so and fiercely proud of. And the same with education. But sometimes we've got to be willing, don't we, to think outside of our ideology, to consider other approaches and best practices, to, dare I say, experiment with, or in a less inflammatory way, to pilot different projects, different approaches, different methods in the quest to determine and preserve and build out the best way of doing things. I appreciated that comment from her. Super Chat Ken goes on to say, one of the very large differences in many better rated systems, so to speak, is a very low cost of education for nurses and doctors. In some cases, their education is even free. Ken wonders why that's not happening here. Matriarch says, as a retired AHS employee, I see the biggest problem is the micromanaging of the healthcare system by government officials who have no experience in healthcare, and there is no consultation when it comes to the people that are actually doing the work. A lot of Star Trek comments, of course, through the show, and I'm not surprised at that. Ken K says Athana took a little while to start opening up, and by the end of the interview, he says, I'm impressed at how very candid that she's been. Yeah, I think she struck a balance. She's walking a fine line right now. I was surprised at some of the candor. I was surprised at some of the things that she said, to be honest with you. And Bushin says it's complicated when we underfund the public option. Of course, the private option will flourish. Says my wife is a psychologist, and a decade of school gets her less than $40 an hour in the public system. Emily G says if you have numerous ministers for different areas of healthcare not talking to each other, that's also going to be a recipe for disaster. Others of you are saying that you do hope that she writes a book. Maybe she can write one in partnership with Dr. Dina Hinshaw. Wouldn't that be interesting? GP says no capital without operating. That's a wonderful insight. Capital is sexy. You know, you can put a sign on a hospital or a school, but funding operations simply appears as taxes. MD says my wife is a charge nurse in the emergency department of a major hospital, has been for decades. They can't talk about specifics, but they go through more trauma in one shift than many jobs do over a lifetime. Sri Miles says, I've got a lot of respect for Athana. I owe Morgan an apology. I believe I must have said she or her, but Morgan corrects me and says I'm not a woman, but I get that a lot because of my name. My sincere apologies. Morgan Freeman, one of my favorite actors of all time. I should have played that one more safely. Canadian Jaybird says, thanks for having Athana on. CC says, thank you for your outstanding courage, Athana. Please take good care of yourself. Stephen M, or Steph M rather, says, I'm standing behind you. CP says, Athana is my hero. Just Joe says, even though she hates the word authentic, it's what she is. So she strikes me as the opposite of the Premier, the Health Minister, and the rest of the hacks. That from Just Joe. Noob says, what a mistake it was to remove Athana. Perhaps it's because she had skill, empathy, and a conscience. Lorraine says, thank you to Athana for doing this interview. Not all heroes wear capes. I'm noticing an interesting trend in our live chat today, and I saw one of you pointed out earlier in the show, and that is that the typical trolls, and I know that some of you, the trolls really drive you absolutely nuts. The bots drive me nuts. The trolls, not so much. And we celebrate, and we're very proud of the fact that there are many different opinions represented in this audience. It's a big audience. It comes from a broad scope across the political spectrum. I love to see people challenging one another in the chat, but there weren't a lot of people in the chat today trolling Athana Mentzelopoulos. Way fewer than I expected when we announced this exclusive interview earlier today. I wonder why that is. Do you have any theories? Let me know to talk@ryanjespersen.com. Noob, thanks for the super chat, congratulating us on 35,000 YouTube subscribers. I appreciate that. Friends, we do want to let you know how much it means to us when you do support this show by liking what we're doing. Like, I'm talking physically clicking on the like, by leaving a comment on it, by sharing our episodes, by subscribing to our YouTube channel, by subscribing to Real Talk Ryan Jespersen on Spotify, on Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts. And most importantly, like several of you have said in the chat today, by telling your friends. There's people who are maybe not going to watch this live, but are going to watch this later because their personal experience with the healthcare system, whether as an employee or a service recipient or even as a taxpayer, has been less than ideal. And they're going to want to hear the behind-the-scenes perspective. They're going to want to know Athana Mentzelopoulos' truth, her side of the story. They're going to want to better understand some of the implications of this alleged procurement scandal, these private surgical facilities and the like. And we want to thank every single one of you that's going to tell your friends about this and send them the link. Before we wrap, I do want to remind you that the Real Talk Pond Hockey Classic is coming up on Saturday, the 31st of January, out in St. Albert at Larry Alexiak Field. This is an annual tradition that we're so proud to roll out, a celebration of Canadiana, rain, snow, ice storms, or shine. I mean, 2 years ago, it was plus 3 degrees during the Real Talk Pond Hockey Classic, friends. The Classic will go down in support of incredible charities, including Uncles and Aunts at Large and Kids Sport. You can go to ryanjespersen.com to register your team today. Just go to the events link and look for Pond Hockey. That's where you can register as a team, a volunteer, or a sponsor. We have sold out 24 teams of up to 6 skaters every single year that we've done this. And we're very proud to let you know that we will expect, based on the trend as of right now, to sell out again. So it means that you got to get your team registered today. We still have room for sponsorship, and we'd love if you'd love to volunteer. And of course, you can always bring the family by to come watch the Real Talk Pond Hockey Classic at Larry Alexiak Field on the 31st of January out in St. Albert. Our friends at DQ will have the burgers there. Our friends at Apex Automation are going to bring their smoker out. I'm hoping for brisket. Our friends at Molson have cold beers there, and they'll be served by the amazing team at Central Social Hall, and the list goes on. It's the Real Talk Pond Hockey Classic, the 31st of January, out in St. Albert. Register your team or to sponsor or volunteer today by visiting the events link at ryanjespersen.com. Well, this episode's gone a little longer than usual for obvious reasons. Once you've had a chance, if you're just listening to it now, to get your thoughts together, feel free to send us an email. And potentially, if it's a hot enough take, you could hear it read in our next episode of the show. That'll be the 9th of January. Of course, the final episode of every week, courtesy of our friends at the DQs of Northwest Edmonton and Sherwood Park, we present the Flamethrower. These are real talkers all fired up with their banger takes. You can fire up your flamethrower right now to talk@ryanjespersen.com, and we'll be sure to consider it as we present the best of what real talkers are bringing to the table. Thanks for being a part of this episode, everybody. We'll talk to you again in 22 hours.
Real Talk is hosted by Ryan Jespersen, executive producer Josh Dunford, technical producer John Hicks, general manager Katie Cook-Chivers, account coordinator Lawrence Derlego, human resources Lena Shepard, website design Mike Johnston, voiceover by me, Carrie Skelton, member emerita Julie Rohr. Real Talk is recorded in Edmonton, Alberta on Treaty 6 territory, the traditional and ancestral territory of the Cree, Dene, Blackfoot, Saulteaux, and Nakota Sioux, home to the Métis settlements and the Métis Nation of Alberta. Real Talk is a relay project. For more, check out ryanjespersen.com.